The Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, New Jersey. It's in the spotlight with Earl Morgan and Tinia Bland.
I've got my three guests here tonight and my co-host Tinia Bland, or Tinia, and we're talking about the Jersey City Board of Education, the three board trustees. Gerald Lyons, who's sitting here, Lorenzo Richardson, who's next to me, and Marilyn, who is also a trustee of the Board of Education. And we were talking about making some comparisons with how education used to work before the great getting up morning, when all of these new things came in, No Child Left Behind and all that, and how they used to teach us, and we're learning that they're putting phonics back in the classroom. And only one comment I got to make about that. My daughter, like you, Gerald, went to Catholic school. Now, I would have loved for her to go to public school. My wife wasn't having it, and I haven't got to tell you how that happened. I'll give it to her. But she went to the Lutheran parochial. They came up with Gen Reading. Miss Kugler, I had Miss Kugler, you had Miss Kugler, I'm sure you had Miss Kugler, and a woman with an iron gray bun, a black dress, black shoes, and a pointer. Brooke, no nonsense from anybody. Well, she came to us and said, this won't work. I was on the board and she said, this doesn't work. I'm not using this. Well, none of us had nerve enough to say, you'll do it. No, we weren't that stupid. So, what are you going to do then? I'll find something else. My daughter, who was in the first grade and that was a teacher, came home with the Dick and Jane reader, a phonics book, and a Think and Do book. That's exactly what I had. Well, my wife said, I said, what is this? She said, well, just see how it works.
It works.
My daughter, and by the second grade, could read anything. I mean, anything. I know because I take her down the street and say, what does that say? And she'd be able to. Now, if it worked for her, that was many, many years after I had Dick and Jane. Why are we using that as opposed to Ginn, Open Court, DC Heat? How many others were there, Marilyn? I mean, all of these other methods that clearly didn't work. And they tell me, I hear things like, well, that was racist because everybody in the book was white. I said, yeah, but I can read. I can read. Yes, Spot wasn't black, and Muff was gray and brown, I think. And Dick and Jane and Sally and Daddy and Mommy were white, but I can read. So I don't care.
But I think sometimes we have to look past the color line. And that color line belongs to us and what we're teaching our children. Are we teaching so that they will learn how to read, or are we teaching prejudice? Because if we're teaching them how to read, it shouldn't matter what you read. It matters that you read. And Earl, you and I have had that problem for a while. Earl walked up to a child, and we're talking about the newspaper, and the child says, I don't read.
Yes.
I mean, what devastating news this is to us, that a person would actually, with great pride.
Say, I not only children, an adult told me at a surprise party, Mr. Morgan, I know you're a journalist, but I don't read. In my day, if you didn't, you would be too embarrassed to admit it.
In my day, you should be.
Yeah. But
I started a newspaper and education program at school. None of us related, but Mara was my supervisor when I was working in high tech, and I taught Lorenzo's brother. So the three of us have a connection besides him.
And I have a connection with Lorenzo. I taught his sister.
So all of us,
everybody in Jersey City knows everybody else.
Right.
Long time.
But we started a program called
6
Newspaper.
inches.
That's right, separation of 6 degrees. I started a program called Newspaper and Education through the Media Center, And we got a bunch of papers, hard copies. A lot of the local papers and the Jersey Journal has been very supportive of that, and the county papers, and then we got New York Times online, Star Ledger online. They had great workshops for that. And then we had incorporated the programs. And there was a big debate on what's appropriate. If you're going to have a newspaper in education, we started a program called DARE, DEAR, Drop Everything and Read. And that was a program, and we said every day for 30 minutes, all the kids are going to stop whatever they're doing, they're going to sit down and they're going to read something. They could sit down on the floor, they could sit down in the chair, they could by yourself, and you're going to read. And then this whole intense conversation about what will be appropriate reading. Should they have to read a book that's aligned to a curriculum? Should they be allowed to read the newspaper? Can they read a sports book? Can they read a magazine? And this whole thing came out, and finally we all decided they're reading.
Exactly.
They're reading. Because most of the kids we found out read hardly anything. And then we found that more kids were picking up, because the Jersey Journal gave us these free copies of the newspaper every day, and they'd come in and they'd pick up the paper and they'd start reading. And I said, a lot of them haven't been exposed to this enough to realize that there's some enjoyment in that.
Yeah.
And now they have a reason to go and pick up something.
You know what I think is interesting too? There was a time when I was the director of the Education Business Alliance, and we had been asked to go to Snyder High School. They were putting together a small learning community which was consisting of the 9th grade students. They were going to have a 9th grade academy. And the teachers, the superintendent wanted us to go over and do some workshops. And so my group went over. And the teachers liked what we did so much that they asked if we could come back every Wednesday when they had common planning time so that we could work with them. And so I went back with them. The first thing I said to them was, do you know where these students are? They're 9th graders, but what's the reading level and what's the math level? Well, we did some testing, and unfortunately we found out that a high percentage of them were reading on 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade reading level. And the same thing was true of the math
This
level.
is Snyder High School.
So I said, yes. I said, and you can't, I said to them, well, you can't teach them with the books that you're using. It's useless because they won't be able to read them, and that will turn them off reading. So I arranged with the district to buy a set of books that was high interest, low vocabulary. But they were about young kids in the city. And they were kids of color too. So they were like them. And they understood the books, and they took them. And I think the principal was going by one day, and a kid was walking down the hall with his head in a book. And she said, what are you reading there? And he said, oh, we have these great books. There's 7 of them in the series. And this is the 7th one. I finished all of them. And you know what? I never read a book before I read these books.
Never read a book.
No, never read a book,
And this
because
is
he was
high
always
school?
getting
This is Snyder High
material.
School.
He was always getting material that he couldn't read. But when you start people where they are, and then you start to move them up, you have to be realistic about that, but you can get them to read. Once they start reading and they get into it, up in the vocational school, I worked there for 5.5 years after I retired from the board. And it was an interesting kind of thing, because you would walk around the first floor and there would be kids sitting on the floor. And what would they be doing? Reading. And they had regular bound novels. You know, they weren't reading their books. They were reading any book they wanted to, but they had the opportunity to sit down and read. They were sitting on the floor by their locker. It was a wonderful sight to me to see just kids who really wanted to read and were just sitting down there to do it. But to go back to the DEAR program, I did that in my classroom for years.
Really?
For years. And I would read at the same time they did. So I took time out of the day for us to read, usually toward the end of the day, because the kids are hyper by that time. Calm them down, they take out their book. Everybody got so into it, you could hear a pin drop in the room.
You know, Marilyn, I'm going to relate an experience I had in the 7th grade with Miss Barrett, teacher I know you know.
Oh, yes.
I was so wrapped up in a book one day. I had to take speech class for some reason. And I was so
Well, it
wrapped
must have
up.
worked, you're fine then.
Yes. Well, I didn't know I wouldn't find that. But, you know, they would pull us out of class. It was 15
Right,
minutes.
yeah.
It wasn't, you know. But I was reading this book. And the speech teacher came and everybody else left with me. I'm still reading this book. I had to stay after school because I missed this. And Miss Barron said, well, you didn't go to speech class. I said, I didn't know she came. She had to laugh.
Right.
Because I was so
You were
quick.
so into the book.
But she was delighted that I was, but of course I read a lot, so I can't use myself as an example. But yeah, it's hard for me to understand, and this is everything. If you can read, you can educate yourself to some degree, but if you can't read, you're lost. You're going to see what.
Yeah, but you don't pick up a book and read it if you can't read it.
Right.
If you
And
look
you
at
have
it
to
and the
keep looking
words
at
are
the
too
words,
hard
yeah.
for you,
Exactly.
it needs to be something that you can read. You have to start with that. And then you move people up the line so that they can do better and can read more.
But how did they get all the way to Snyder High School?
Well, it's beyond Snyder. NJCU has a whole program because our friend, the woman that works for us,
NJCU meaning New Jersey City.
New Jersey University, has a program. The vice principal of high tech is a college, an adjunct professor at NJCU. Her job at NJCU is to teach writing skills to kids that can't graduate college because they can't pass the exit exam.
Exactly.
They've been through 8 years of grammar school, they've been through 4 years of high school, and 4 years of college, they can't pass the written exit exam.
I've heard this.
And that was why we started Asterisk for Success, because we found that we had young men and women that had graduated Earl and are out here living amongst us and literally were socially illiterate.
Yeah.
And when we started it and we paired teachers with adults that are living amongst us that were brave enough, and I say they have courage. They had enough courage to say, we can't take this test. We don't understand how to write a resume. Of course they don't, Earl. It's
'Cause they were never taught
beyond
to,
them.
yeah.
We left them behind. The No Child Left Behind left so many behind.
Well-
That when we started the program, we had this influx of people who wanted to be a part of it. And then our biggest problem was whether or not we would be charged by the school because we weren't doing it as an association.
Well, you know, I remember once that one of my neighbors had a very bright young man who watched Sesame Street and it helped teach him how to read. And he went to school and he could read. And they were angry with him, his mother, because they said, well, you didn't teach him the right way.
What right way? He reads.
You're right.
Is it the right way?
Reads.
I mean, you know, if he can read, he can read.
Right.
And I stay on this subject because I truly believe that without reading, your education is hobbled. You know, you can't go forth, you can't go anywhere without that.
Mr. Morgan, I can't agree with you more. When I decided to run for the Board of Ed, before that I was doing an annual literacy program. I would give out free books and I would go up to Hudson County Community College and I met a lot of the administrators there and several of them were from the English department. So I would hear these stories about, you know, the issues with students coming in, many from our district, the majority from our district, and they had to do remediation classes.
Yes.
And, you know, I kept trying to think in my head, well, what can I do about that? What can I do about that? So, other than giving out books, because those are younger children and, you know, they're already getting a head start, I said, well, what can I do on the higher level? So, of course, I doubled my efforts, you know, with the school board, talking about how they need to, because they always started talking about this new math thing, and I said, and I always debate
One and
them
one
on
is two any place
yeah,
in the universe.
and I continue to debate them on that issue. You know, even though they are in education and I'm not, but I know what works and what doesn't work because I went through that process. And it was funny that this past month I sat down with a bunch of my colleagues from around the state, and these are all urban school board members, and we decided that we are going to push to make sure that statewide that they put cursive writing
Yes.
and phonics back in the schools. Those are the two things that we're going to push. And being that I'm also part of the legislative committee, which is under school boards as well, I'm going to be working with my legislators to make sure that that happens. And we're going to put a lot of pressure on these legislators to make sure that they're putting because those are two fundamental things. If you look back at it and you ask any educator, those are two fundamental things that if you don't have those two things in place, you're not going to get too far with education.
Well, let me ask
for
you,
children.
when they took cursive writing out of the schools, did it occur to anybody that you can't print your name? Cursive writing, incidentally, for anyone out there that doesn't know it, is script writing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not printed script writing. That you can't print your name on a deed or a credit card
A
application.
job application.
Or
There's
a
a
job,
young
you gotta
lady
be able to write your name.
in BJ's trying to fill out a job application. And you know why she was sent back? She couldn't sign. And she's sitting down literally at a desk. I'm passing by and says, can you help me with this? This is an adult that we
Yeah.
left behind.
We
We
need,
failed her educationally.
this is the thing that bothers me, because I know the people around this table here in this conversation are really deeply committed. And I really would like to get to some of the issues here. But we're gonna have to take another break and we'll come back.
You're listening to content developed by the GoPro Radio Network, the fastest growing network in the galaxy. GoPro Radio Network. Listen to the voices in your head.
Attention. Parents of children in Hudson County school districts including Harrison, West New York, Jersey City, Hoboken, and Union City. You may qualify for free or low-cost child care. The Urban League of Hudson County is providing parents with the opportunity to apply if eligible for before and after school care for children 3 and 4 years old. Find out how. Come to our offices or call at 201-451-8888 extension 186. Urban League of Hudson County. Good evening, this is Earl Morgan, your host of the Earl Morgan Hour in the Spotlight, / in the Spotlight, which is our new name. I'm going to stop saying the Earl Morgan Hour very shortly, and I'm here with my host, Tinia Bland, who is my wingman here, and I couldn't do without. We have tonight an extremely interesting program. We have Gerald Lyons, trustee of the Jersey Board of Education. Next to him is Lorenzo Richardson, also a trustee of the Jersey Board of Education, and Marilyn Roman, a trustee of the Board of Education in Jersey City. And both Gerald and Marilyn have an extra amount of expertise here because they're both educators. Lorenzo he steeped himself in education to the point that they hate to see him coming at the board meeting. Before he ran, oh, here comes that Lorenzo again. You know we're gonna have trouble with him again tonight. Oh my God, here comes Richardson. But his interest is why he was able to get on the board. And we're gonna move the conversation now into another area which is very sensitive with us: charter schools. Let me explain what charter schools are. They're public schools that get public money, but are operated by people other than the Board of Education. They get Board of Education funds. 90% of their funding comes from the Jersey City Board of Education budget.
But let's go through that again. They are what type of schools? A charter school is what type of school?
It's a public school. And I'm saying they get money from the public school budget, 90% of the budget. But they're not monitored or regulated by the Jersey City School Board. I would like for some of the people around this panel to talk a little bit about charter schools. I know you know a lot about, all of you know a lot about it, but I'd like to hear your take on it, Lorenzo.
Well, again, they are publicly funded schools, but they're managed by a separate board. They have their own board, so they're not.
You mean each charter school has its own Board of Education?
Right. They have their own board of trustees. So, along with that, we are basically, for the most part, a pastor. We receive the funds, and they are given over to the charter schools by the district based on their allocations. But I think one of the things that people don't know is that we also pay for other things for charter schools like transportation, special education, even in some cases out-of-district placement if they're
Out-of-district placement, explain what that means.
If, let's say, there's a particular school that provides a service for a child that has unique needs,
yeah.
special or unique needs, and let's say that school is in another town. We would, because of the need to make sure that that child gets the best education possible, would pay to send that child to that school to be educated.
Okay.
Regardless of the cost.
Right. Gerald, how do you feel about the situation there?
I brought up the last time I was on the board, and it's coming up again now because this year we just put out another $5 million of our budget to the charter schools. We're up over $50 million now.
53 million.
53 million, thank you. Here's the problem we have. You have we have a large budget, but you have a lot of expenses that are aligned to that budget. How can you, as the board members and the employees, the people who make decisions, how can you determine what you're going to do when you have no idea? Again, there's more schools that are put in to be charter schools again in Jersey City for the upcoming year. So we know that there's one that's thinking about doubling the size of their charter school, very close to where we're at right now. And if you're going to say, okay, another $4 million, $6 million, $8 million coming out of your budget, where do you make those cuts?
Yes.
We have no bonus money. So we can't just say, okay, that's $8 million, it's gone. When you take those kids from anywhere in the city, then you might still have a classroom in 34 school that has now 5 less kids in it. You don't close that classroom down, you still have to run that class, you still have to have the cafeteria workers, the security guards, and the maintenance people. So when those people get pulled out, those people go to, if they choose to go to another schooling place, you still have to operate the budget. I'm not saying it's your choice. You want to put your kids in a school that's a charter school, a public school, a parochial school, that's your business. What we need to do as the board members is we need to sit together. How can we make our schools the best they can possibly be so people want to keep their kids in our school district?
Let me ask you this, Marilyn, because it's been, their contention is that the money that they get is the money for the students that they have. In other words, each student is as they say, captures, right? They get 90%. And that's always been, at least up until recently, that's how it's always been. And that they're saying that since we're educating our children here, give us that money and we'll do it. I'm going to tell you where I have a problem with that. This all originated in the South. The original charter schools came from the South. Tinia is from New Orleans. She probably has a little bit more bit more experience than I have with that. But in the South, when they did not want to abide by Brown versus Board of Education, what the people who didn't want to desegregate said is, we're not going to do it. We're going to take our kids and open private academies. And they did. Then they found out what everybody in the charter schools found out. Cost a lot of money. So when they found that out, they went back to the Board of Ed and said, give us the money that it's allocated for each of our students and we'll educate them ourselves. The state said we cannot do that because you wish to discriminate.
Right.
That is against the federal law. It sort of got moved around a bit and now it becomes the charter schools we know about, and that's their argument, that we're educating the children and they got 90%. But I'm not mistaken, they now want parity on the funding with the public school system. What would that do to you? What effect would that have on the Jersey City schools or anybody's school board?
Well, anytime you take funding away from public schools and give it to a charter, that's less money for the public school district to operate on. So think of it in this terms. Let's say, for example, it costs $1 million to do all of the general operations of a school. I'm talking about, the upkeep,
Any school, right.
the maintenance, utilities, all of those different things that go into running a school. So now you're going to say, okay, well, in this case, this year, we took out another $5 million. So that's $5 million we don't have for our schools to help operate, to pay for utilities and other things.
That means you're approaching $60 million a year.
Yes.
Our expenses don't go down.
Right, and you have these fixed costs.
Right.
So, and in some cases, these things go up. Energy costs go up every year, and a lot of other costs go up every year.
Light bills go up?
Yes, yes.
And then we don't know about
Service goes up.
teacher salaries too. That's
Right.
involved in
Yes.
that too.
Yes.
So you have all of those expenses that I call them traveling expenses because they're not fixed. And you have all of these problems, but the last week, about 2 weeks ago, one of the Jersey City Board of Ed trustees raised this issue. Ellen Simon, I believe was her name. She raised the issue of the charter schools. And if I remember rightly, she wasn't exactly a person that was opposed to charter schools. But she's beginning to
You can see the money train.
the money's draining out. And I remember when we first had a forum about education, oddly enough, we were at Lincoln High School. And what happened, Tinia, when we were talking about a PA system, what did they tell us?
Oh, no PA system?
No.
Couldn't afford
There's
it.
no money.
That's right.
But you see, I think we're all concerned about the money, all of us, because it gives us less money to do a job that's already difficult because we do have various kids in the buildings who are not doing well.
Correct.
But I'm more concerned about the brain drain
Yes.
in the school district. What's happening is so many of the parents want their children to go to charter schools. So they're pulling them out of the public schools. What happens to the public schools because you're losing sometimes the most skilled kids? Because a parent who's really interested in the child's education is going to be more interested in looking into the charter schools than somebody who is not aware of them as much. So we have a problem with so many of our students who are gone, and then we have what's left are the kids who need the most money in order for us to be able to educate them, and we're having less. And we have less. And so that becomes a tremendous problem, and I also see it in a way that you may not agree with me, but I think there used to be, in years past, we had segregation. We segregated people by race.
Yes, we did.
Well, I think this is becoming, without anybody wanting to do it, but inadvertently, it's
Segregated
becoming
by
by class. Yes,
But,
that's what's happening here.
but you know, there's something beautiful about public versus private. If you want a different education, when my son, was in public school for a minute, and because what I found out, I could afford to pay for a private school, and we kept having these small issues, asbestos in the building. You say parents are allowed to come in, but parents aren't allowed to come in. You could sign, you could wait, you could petition the teacher early, they still couldn't get in. I asked, could the board members come in at any time and see? At that time, they told me no. I said, well, why do we have board members then? Why do we have board members if they aren't allowed to come in at any time to see the value of an education? Why aren't we making the public versus private such a clear difference? I don't know why we have that third party.
Or better yet,
That's
public versus charter.
But well, no, I'm wondering why would we need charter? I mean, because it
Well,
seems.
I think people have come to the conclusion that people should have choice. And so that's a very popular word now.
But you know what? If choice equals money leaving, then I don't know if that is a choice.
Well,
Because
It's a choice for some and no choice for others.
Exactly, that's the
Right.
point.
Well, what I see, what worries me a little bit, and it may be a fear that is I'm over exaggerating, but what becomes the possibility is that the schools become the dumping grounds, the public schools, regular
Absolutely.
traditional, for kids who nobody else wants. We have to take another break. We shall be back shortly.
See, that's what I find to be hard.
You're listening to content developed by the GoPro Radio Network, the fastest growing network in the galaxy. GoPro Radio Network. Listen to the voices in your head.